on our main segment on Mastering Dungeons, we are going to take a trip to our listener corner. We are going to wade in, put on our hazmat suits, and see what we can find that's been hiding, that's been sitting in the corners, just gathering dust and waiting for us to deal with it. So here we go with the goodness. We're going to start with Fox Trick via YouTube. I have a question about survey feedback. I've asked James Introcaso about how he processes MCDM survey data, but I'd love to hear your take. Have you ever been on the publishing side of a survey, and how do you approach composing the questions and analyzing the results? Thank you for your insights. Yes, I have been on both sides of this. And I've been on all sides of this because I also worked for a digital marketing company for 20 years. And one of our products and services was creating and analyzing surveys. So I have a good deal of experience. The first thing I will say is no survey is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
No, nothing will ever be perfect. And the first thing that you will get when you do a survey is people telling you how bad your survey is, no matter how good it is. So you can't win, but hopefully you can do a few things. How do you do this? The first thing you need to figure out is, what do you want to know? What is the question? What are the questions you are trying to get an answer to? And with that question should come a plan to deal with the results.
Mm-hmm.
We want to know X. If we learn A, this is maybe what we should do. If we learn B, this is what we should do. So don't just go in with a question. Go in with a question and a plan to deal with the answers. That will help you make better questions right away. So once you know what you want, you need to figure out the best way to ask the question to elicit the data you desire. Then you have to carefully craft that question to avoid biases or skewing the data in some way. If you want to know about beginners dealing with your game, don't go on to your most sacred fan sites where everyone's been there 50 years, because you are not going to get the data that you want. And then select the audience of the survey that will elicit the data you desire without skewing the results. So again, if you are specifically looking for new players,
Mm-hmm.
find where new players are interacting with you and put that survey there, rather than at a different spot where you might not get the information that you want. There's so much more, but I'm going to stop there and let Teos step in.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Shawn. My wife had a bunch of coursework in survey design and did some work in it, and so we would often talk about the Wizards of the Coast surveys, and then I would get her insight into what it meant. Things that I've noticed over the years that are really key is that idea of knowing what you're asking and why you're asking it. And it's really an interesting way to look at a survey, right? Like, what is the company asking? And what do we think they'll do with it, right? And we can see, like, Wizards of the Coast would kind of, it almost feels like what they want is a pass fail on their ideas, rather than asking questions about what you want or getting into details of the types of thoughts you have around the game. And that's a very interesting thing to do, right? Because what you're saying is, hey, what if the player's handbook has, beast-headed creatures? Okay, you hated it, it's gone. What if I change how critical hits work? Oh, you hate it, it's gone, right? Rather than saying, what would you want from critical hits in today's game? What kind of variance do you want in species? Where kind of, there's a whole set of questions you could ask that could get to that and really provide greater information. We weren't asked anything about, and even obviously there are the issues of timing and things like that, but we were told, oh, you'll get to check out the monsters. We never did. You get to check out the new encounter design rules that we're testing. We never did, right? They never got to these things, but there had been that desire. And so that's the other thing that's difficult about surveys is you often have a desire to do things, but you may not get there. And that will hurt what you end up with if you can't get any feedback on it. And maybe they took those out simply because they didn't know how to ask the question in a way that would have been productive to them. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah. And while this question was about surveys,
Mm-hmm.
there is this implicit part of the question, which is playtesting.
Mm.
And surveys are probably the worst way to get playtest feedback.
Yeah.
But it's also the most efficient way. So there's a trade-off there.
Yeah.
And so when you do a survey, think about the Cola Wars, for those of you who remember the 80s, where it was Coke versus Pepsi, and there were all these ads, and there was the blind taste test of which do people like most. And while there are many factors that go into that, it's a pretty simple process of drink this, tell us which one you like better.
Yeah.
You can do it a lot of different ways. You could say, okay, you like A. Why do you like A? In 2 or 3 words, what about the taste of A made you? Now, some people will say, oh, A is much sweeter than B, and I like A. Some people will say, oh, A is much more sweeter than B, so I like B, right? Because I don't want a sweet cola. I want a whatever cola. But that's about as finicky as that gets. When you're dealing with something like a role-playing game, rules and engine, and everything that goes with that, now you are into all sorts of variations of taste, of style, of interest that can be terribly, terribly difficult to lasso and wrestle to the ground.
Yeah.
So what is more important in a playtest, especially if you're dealing with the engine of the game, is really hard data. If someone plays my adventure and they say it ran too long,
Mm-hmm.
that's useful to me at about 3%. What I need to know is, okay, who was playing, who was running it, how many people, what level were they? Was there a certain part that was too long? Why was it too long? Was it too long because the combat took too long? Was it too long because the players wanted to do lots of role playing? Right? All of these things then become more important than did you like it? Was it good? I need to know these hard facts because then I have a plan to address this. But
Yeah.
without that hard data, you can't.
Yeah, and that's where knowing what you want to learn from it is really key, right? In an adventure, it's really easy to do a survey that says encounter 1, rate from 1 to 5 how fun it was.
Mm-hmm.
And there are years when Wizards has basically only wanted that from me. And
Mm-hmm.
that's it murders me to try to answer that because
Right.
to me what makes a product great is not knowing that you had a 3, but how do you make each encounter just hit top tier levels of experience, which is what you should expect from Wizards of the Coast product. And to do that, you really need to look at what took place in an encounter and how it can shine and be better, right? And so if we look across the experiences that we've had in big adventures, we can see things like, well, it felt like the punchline of the adventure finished halfway through, or you made me start an adventure with 12 NPCs I had to run, or anything like that, right? And these kinds of things really have an impact on the play and how good it is. So how can you build in questions that'll bring that out in a way that you will react to, because someone may say it and you may discount it. So it's that key of picking up on those things that will really make it better. and how to get that is tough.
Yeah. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful. Uh, it really is a matter of figuring out what you want and then drilling down to get that exact information. Next, we have Chris G8989 via YouTube, who asks this. If you could add one thing, a section, a feature, a design, a monster, etc., to the 2025 Monster Manual that you think is lacking, what would it be?
Mhm.
And if you could omit one thing, what would it be? I personally would have loved a monster by CR list. Help me if I'm wrong here, Teos. There is a monster by CR list in the Monster Manual, right?
There is, but it may not be exactly what you desire, depending on kind of how you want to break it down.
Okay.
Um, but
Because
there,
I looked in the back, the very last
yeah,
pages as I reached for
yeah,
my Monster Manual.
yeah. But that one I think is pretty good. I mean, it really is like CR0 is an awakened shrub, and CR18 is a bandit, and everything in between for all
Yeah.
those CRs is written out.
Okay.
My issue with CRs is actually the other tables. If I can add a step here, which is that
Mhm.
when you look at something like monsters by let's see, habitat, they do, which is good.
Mhm.
But monsters by creature type, for example, right, will say here's the list of aberrations. It really could have put a CR next to those names,
Gotcha.
right?
Yeah.
Or monsters by group, where it says here are the angels, here are the beholders, here are the demons, here are the devils, etc. If it had put those CRs on there, that would have made these appendices easier, because it's about thinking about who's asking the question. You're looking at this table probably as a DM who wants to create an adventure, and that CR can matter, right? Because it's a big part of the math equation that's going on in your challenge.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's answer the question, Teos.
Yeah.
If you could add one thing, what would you add?
I've been thinking about this a lot as I sit back and contemplate, now that all 3 core books are out, how do I feel about it and how do I feel about the Monster Manual. I think when it comes to the Monster Manual, that this format of semi-alphabetical encyclopedia of stat blocks and a picture and a stat block, I feel like this is fine, but kind of antiquated and doesn't really meet what DMs are doing in today's game, right? In like the olden days, like, my DM didn't care to role play much of anything. So picking a monster and chucking it in there is great. And that's all you need is the picture, the stat block, the bit of lore there to color it, and you're done. Now, I think like we want more than this. And so, what if we changed our approach and the monster manual showed us, yes, a bunch of monsters alphabetically or whatever, but also taught us how to adjust and create our own monsters? Because what's better, 20 variant monsters of various types, like one goblin, one, whatever, or guidance that helps us make any number of variants for any monster? You want a goblin at a higher CR? Here's what you do. You want a goblin that specializes in, that is a sorcerer? Here's what you do, right? Similarly, I think that a monster is not the building block that matters most. It's the encounter, and the monsters are a critical part of that. So the MM should help us place monsters in interesting and engaging encounters. And it doesn't do that, right? We saw a little bit of that in when we did our review of Monster Overhaul. But this idea of like, how do you make this into an encounter? And it's more than just like the tables we see in the 2024 M. It's around what you can weave with this monster to make it cool, make it engaging. And there just isn't much of that in this book.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Okay. All right. All right. I actually had a chance to do this, right? Because I got a chance to make my own monster book for Grim
Yeah.
Hollow, the Monster Grimoire. And so I added two things. I added a lore section that actually had numbers attached for players to learn something about the monster. So, right, a CR or CR, a
DC.
DC 15 nature check would tell you that the poison that this creature used and what it does to you.
Mhm.
DC 20 about this extra planar creature would let you know its resistances. Uh, because for me, the differences that the game runs at each table is a huge factor in its enjoyment. If I create an adventure that goes off to this group and they have an easy time of it, and it goes off to this group and they have a hard time of it, the difference might be this DM is telling them every single trick that is in there without a
Right.
check, without
Hmm.
anything. Whereas this game master is either making them make rolls to learn stuff or not telling them at all and making them
Yeah.
learn it the hard way. So for me, having a codified system
Mm.
that a DM is welcome to ignore,
Right.
but there is this grounding of expectation that it will be an action or a bonus action. I'm never going to use a bonus action for that, but you're right.
Sure. Something.
It's either spending resources or making free checks or something that teach you this. So that's why
Yeah.
I put that into the Monster Grimoire.
Hmm.
The second thing I added was salvage rules to show characters that in this setting, we're not going to have this sprawling magic item creation, sales infrastructure, uh, small mart, uh, what have you, right? You're not just going to roll up and find 3+2 swords and a wand of magic missiles and all of this in a lair, right? You're going to have to work a little harder to get that. And how you do that is you make it yourself with monster parts. So we introduced this salvage system that I think really adds a lot to a specific kind of campaign,
Hmm.
which is what we are going for with Grimhollow.
Yeah, that's cool. Hmm.
Uh, so the second part was leaving out something.
Hmm.
What would you leave out of the monster manual, if anything?
Yeah, I would just take out a lot of monsters that I think are getting in the way of teaching DMs, right? Like, so you made another goblin when you could have taught them how to make more goblins. I would just free up
Okay.
all that space, right? Of all those
So
just,
same answer.
yeah, I don't mind
Yeah.
variants, but we'll talk about this in a future show, but I just think there can be, yeah, it's that same thing. I would take space out of that to teach people how to do more, right? And enable the DM to do more.
Mhm. I'm taking out alignment and I'm taking out ability scores. Doesn't It might leave you a little extra room. And with that little bit of
Mm.
extra space that you might be able to fit somewhere in the stat block. Oh, and I'm also taking out skills. And what I'm putting in instead is a short phrase or description that as the game master, I can use in place of all of those, in
Mm.
place of alignment, in place of those skills.
Mm.
Right. So instead of a goblin being I'm guessing neutral, evil, yeah, whatever, fey with stealth, I'm just getting a phrase like sneaky, backstabbing,
Yeah,
follower,
like it's
right? A
qualities.
sneaky,
Gotcha.
backstabbing follower. So I know that if I need to sneak, backstab, or what its attitude will be, it's a follower. So it's going to acquiesce to the most powerful person in its sight. It's sneaky, so it's going to have stealth. I already have its dexterity modifier. I know its proficiency bonus. I can do all of that on my own. Uh, give me a column at the front of the book that tells me how to do this, and I'm set. I don't need that in there. And I
Yeah.
can use that for role playing purposes as well.
By the way, goblins were neutral evil in 2014 and are now chaotic neutral.
Okay, there you go. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, yeah, at the stat block level, I kind of agree with that, especially because it feels like we were talking about this on our Discord today that abilities feel nonsensical and non-relative, as does sort of CR, but that's another topic. But the ability level, it's like what's stronger, a giant crab or a warrior? I don't know. It's as if the
Mhm.
game no longer cares, right? There is no, it's like a way to breach a certain challenge unit.
Yeah.
So I would just take that all out and just say your plus blah to checks. And same thing with, like
Mhm.
you said, with skills. Like maybe you could have a couple skills they're particularly good at, but just give me a plus blah that I normally roll. I think it's just a lot of dead space. It feels real, but it's not real. It's fantasy engine stuff rather than being the actual reality of all monsters relative to one another. In the same
Mhm.
way that, what is stronger, a cloud giant or the highest CR performer? Might be the performer, right? Probably is. I'd have to check. I don't, I haven't remembered, but there's just that nonsensical aspect of things, right? That I would just want to tweak down.
Mhm. Mhm. Next, from Kurt Ugle 4576 via YouTube. Kurt asks, looking at the 2024 DMG's 9 tracking sheets, I don't think I'll be using them as is, but I appreciate what they are presenting as important for a DM to keep track of. However, as my group tries out Bastions, that tracker may get used. Do you use tracking sheets of any kind for your games other than pen and paper notes? So, what tracking sheets is Kurt Ugle talking about? Game expectations, travel planner, NPC tracker, settlement tracker, campaign journal, DM's character tracker, campaign conflicts, magic item tracker, and bastion tracker. The answer to do I use any of these sheets is not unless I need to. How about you, Teos?
I love tracking things because
Mhm.
this will shock nobody who knows me, but I run complicated campaigns just like I run complicated encounters. And so there are things that I need to track, and I'm drawn to things that are kind of more complex. So I do want tracking sheets, but these tracking sheets do not work for me. Neither the space allocated, no, nor the things, like whether it's game expectations or travel planner. It's not the sheet I would use. They're cute, they're fine. I think it's great as an example of something you could do and to encourage you to use tracking sheets, but I wouldn't use, I don't think, any of these. Like I don't want a whole page on an NPC, right? Like that's no, I can't do that. I have too many NPCs in my game, and
Mhm.
so it just doesn't work. But things that I do, like in my Deadlands current campaign, I have a list of all the map locations on the greater map, and they're evolving fear levels, which change during
Mhm.
play based on things the characters do. So I track that fear level for each town. I also know what major features or quests each of those towns has, all on one piece of paper that I've got there. For the main town, I track which NPCs they've met and if any strong relationships are developed with those, as well as kind of crossing off the quests and clues that they've picked out from these various NPCs that are on there. None of this exists this is all stuff in the adventure, but there is no tracking form like this. I created this to try to make sense of it and sort it. Just even the very act of creating the sheet helps me learn it. And now I can reference it more easily than, thumbing through the guide. I track the PC hindrances and edges they've taken, which are sort of like feats and negative feats, because these at times create role playing opportunities. There are mechanics too, but I'm less focused on those, but more that idea of like if you're cursed or whatever, I need to remember that when you meet someone who would react to this curse and sense it. I have custom wilderness travel sheets and various rules and campaign references. So you can see, Shawn, I've got a lot. And in terms of how I go about it, what I do is review these on the treadmill or stationary bike the day before I run the game, so that this
Mhm.
stuff is all fresh in my mind and I remember how to use it properly. And a big part of that is I decide one or two PCs in this campaign that I want to spotlight, and I then will think through how I want to do that based on all this information I'm reviewing. Right, so like, okay, I think this is the day when this particular character should get the spotlight. I could do that in the one of these three ways. I could probably figure in during the session, even though I have no idea what they might do. They could probably run into this person, or they might go on this trail. So this is how I could make their character a big part of
Mhm.
shine a light on what they're doing and who they are.
Yeah. And I will second Teos' statement that these are fine, these trackers. The reason I don't need them is because I'm generally either running an adventure that's published or I'm
Mhm.
running an adventure that will be published. So I have everything I need in front of me. And as I'm running it as a playtest, as I'm running it, uh, as I'm writing it, I am
Mhm.
jotting all of these things down as notes. So I don't need a NPC tracker because I've got all my NPCs on this sheet already. That's how I'm tracking them. The conflicts,
Yeah.
all of that I have uh, on my sheet. So if I was running a more sort of fly by the seat of my pants game, then I would
Mhm.
definitely probably pick up at least a couple of these, like the settlement trackers, to keep track of the towns and
Yeah.
the campaign journal to remember what I've covered.
Yeah, I really liked how Stacey Allen and Will Doyle came up with that idea in Wild of the Witchlight. Like, hey, I think they probably asked themselves, what needs tracking? Oh, these things need tracking. Let's put this form into the back of the adventure that is
Mhm.
functional to the core of what this experience should be, right? And gave you that right then and there. And I thought that was really smart of them to do that.
Yeah, and in the Oracle of War campaign that Will and
Mm,
I started and oversaw, um, right, every adventure had the tracking sheet at the end that kept track of all the not only the experience and the gold and the treasure and the magic items, but important story elements. Did you rescue so and so? Check.
right.
Um, and it's just that's something that, especially in an organized play campaign, but even works with your home group.
Yeah.
If there's somebody that's not going to, if no one is going to take notes, let us make the notes for you. And I
Yeah.
think that is very helpful.
Yep.
The second part of Kurt's question was about prep time.
Hmm.
Uh, Kurt says, my prep time meter is that I love to make documents and PDFs of NPCs and location art, as a picture says 1,000 words. I find this practice inspiring, and my players respond strongly to this added enthusiasm and imagery. Do other DMs out there prep like this? What kind of extra prep do you find satisfying? Uh, I don't. And again, it's because if I have the book, I'm just holding up the pictures that in the book. Uh, Handouts are great. I'm not going to make them. I'm going to take them out of the book. Uh, and I don't respond to visuals, so I
Hmm.
don't think to make visuals, even if they would be appreciated. It's just not something that triggers for me.
I think they're a huge, huge boon if you can do them. And when I've used them, it's been fantastic. I know I've shared before on the show. When I ran the D&D encounters, I would print out. I had a color printer at the time, and so I would print out whatever the monsters and NPCs were for that session, and into a cardstock, and just fold them and put them, over my DM screen or in front of me as I ran. And people loved that, right? Like it was really cool. And it was sort of fun for me too, because I would just go look for a flaming skeleton of some kind or whatever it might be and put that on there. And of all ages, people they really love that experience. And I actually heard from someone recently who was saying they tried that and they really liked it. So that's great to hear. Um, with the Blade Runner game that gives you these amazing visuals, those were really helpful for people. I think who like that kind of visual approach, right? That, this is the room that you're going to search, guided their play, and seeing all the NPCs have cards, right? Aliens, Blade Runner do this where they give you NPC cards. It really makes, I think it made a really big difference for play. So I think if you can take that time, it's great. The problem is sort of like, yeah, you've either got to have they're all on an iPad or something like that, or you're printing them, or so you just it takes that time to do it. But if you can, it's great. Or like the Harrow deck of NPCs is fantastic.
Excellent. Now, on to the question from Andrew B. via Blue Sky. Crossing the alpha streams, question inspired by Teos's awesome D&D video on monster math changes. What, if anything, should we as customers expect from third-party publishers when they advertise monster books as 2024 compatible? Is it fair to expect the new math CR calculations to be acknowledged? I will say this.
Yeah, what do you think?
I think that if a publisher says this is 2024 compatible, they should have it in the new format and have it be an attempt to update to the new math with the understanding that there is no perfect formula, right? As much as we praised Tom Dunn and in our first segment
Sure.
for the work that they do, uh, there is no perfect formula. So should the new format, should the new math, should the new structure be in place? Yes. Will there still be problems? Absolutely. There will still be monsters that are too strong. There will still be monsters that are too weak. Uh, there will still be monsters that paralyze you, and then you get a saving throw that you could never make while you're paralyzed. That sort of thing. Uh, it will still happen. So the answer is yes, but you can't expect perfection because there is no perfect formula, even the one that Wizards makes.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because in some ways, Wizards said, well, 2014 is compatible.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just, in theory, a third publisher could say, if I just do what I always did, hey, look, it's compatible, right? Or anything in between. But I think that if you're going to make that statement, you really should work towards the new rule set, and it's about that effort, right? I know I've seen some folks who've said like there are some products out there that say they're Tales of the Valiant compatible, but they're not really using those particular Tales of the Valiant features that are different from 5th edition. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's compatible, but you didn't do your work. You didn't make
Right.
that step that I expected of with this. And so yeah, I think that Andrew's on the right track, that as customers, we should expect that. If you're going to say that this is your goal, then that you did work on this to achieve that, I think is important. Otherwise, it is a letdown, and I mean, and I think publishers should realize it's going to make you look less capable because you didn't achieve that. But as customers, also the other side, to realize that, hey, Wizards hasn't given us a how to build a monster,
No.
and assuming they never do, which was probably on purpose, then we've got to go back and figure that out, and it's going to be imperfect.
Mm-hmm. The good news is if a designer does the due diligence, you now have 300 plus examples to work from. So whether you're updating old 2014 monsters or creating brand new 2024 monsters, here's your Bible, right? Here's your storyboard and world Bible and storybook and everything that you need right here. So just take the time to do it. Next, we have Daniel Collins coming to us via Blue Sky. With the release of the 2024 core books, I had a question. Do you always play the newest edition? Do you ever itch to play any of the older editions? I understand your designer jobs would most benefit from the most recent goodness, but what about your home games? Starting with third edition, I've always moved on to the new edition the moment that someone paid me to move on to the new edition. That means relatively quickly, often before the new edition is even released or made public. I have been playing with the new edition because that was my job. Since I've played every edition of the game, I rarely go back and play the old editions because if I have the time to play something that I don't need to play, I want to learn new mechanics. I want to learn new ways of telling stories through dice and imagination. I don't want to look at the old ways because they're already stuck in here somewhere anyway. So that's sort of my answer to that.
Yeah, that's largely true for me too. The other thing that I would add is, and this comes up a lot when folks say like, "Oh, we don't care what happens to D&D or what Wizards does because we always have our books. And that's
Mhm.
true, but I am often wanting to benefit from the larger community that's out there. Their
Mhm.
excitement, what they're doing, what they're creating, how they're getting together to play in public spaces. So I want to be out there as part of that, and that's going to be whatever the new edition is, right? So if I like, Shadowrun 4e better than 6, doesn't matter. I'm going to play whatever's running at a convention because that's how I'm going to get my Shadowrun on. And that'll be true
Mhm.
whatever 7 looks like and 8 and so on. I'm going to play whatever's out there because it's fun to be
Right.
part of that community and doing that in play. Maybe if I were running something at home, I might consider doing an older edition of some game that I like. But
Mhm.
as Shawn said, I would probably just run a different game, because
Mhm.
almost every edition gets better in enough ways going forward that to go
Mhm.
back is to end up in like
Right.
a different era of play with the things
Yeah.
that come from that.
And
Unless you're
even
willing to make it your full-time homebrew to like make it exactly what you want.
Yeah. And even older editions have been updated in newer games by other companies. So, right, all of the OSR is first and second edition. Third edition moved on with Pathfinder and a few others. Fourth edition moved on with uh help me out, Teos. 13th Age.
Yeah, 13th Age.
13th Age, the designer
Yeah,
of fourth. And
yeah,
and now we're seeing the remnants of fourth edition being added to Draw Steel. We're seeing, different versions of different games move forward. And so rather than go back and playing third edition, I would probably play some other
yeah, yeah. You could play
remnant of
Pathfinder.
third
You could
edition.
play Pathfinder
Yeah.
2. You could play 13th Age. You could, and yeah, and 13th Age is a great example because it combines sort of the best of third and fourth, right?
Hmm.
And you can see fourth in Draw Steel. You can see it in Daggerheart, and maybe that might be more fun to you because it also is bringing in these new ideas, or not, right? There's nothing wrong with. I mean, I loved fourth
Sure.
edition, so there's nothing wrong with my just playing 4e. But the truth is that once I start working on like a new edition of a game, which is usually D&D, my brain becomes so locked into those rules that I just
Mhm.
forget everything about the previous rule set. And so to go back to it is to have to relearn it. And that may hurt my understanding of the current game if I'm really going to run a
Mhm.
campaign that way. And I've seen this. I've seen folks, for example, who play Pathfinder and D&D who will say things like, "Okay, roll to confirm that crit," and I have to say to them, we don't do that, right?
Right.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So that's something I try to avoid because I want my design to be really crisp on whatever RPG I'm writing for, and so it's too much of an issue if I'm going back and forth like that.
Very, very true. The one that's held on for me is reflex save. For some reason, that just rolls off to make a reflex save. What's that? It's a dexterity save. Keep up, keep up. Come on, people.
Make me a listen
Uh,
check.
yes. We'll hear from the Verve via Blue Sky here. If we want TTRPGs to reflect character in a narrative ways arc, it's interesting that we only typically allow ability scores to increase, and in most D&D like games, these increases are rare and irreversible. Are there RPGs where ability scores are able to change more frequently and go up and down rather than just up? Just curious to playtest. Uh, each session, you can increase one stat by one and decrease another by one, so your character can shift with the narrative. You just spent a few weeks traveling through the wilderness. You're probably fitter than before, but you may have lost some practice in the social graces. Uh, so this is, I love questions like this,
Yeah,
right? This
great.
is like, what can we do with this?
Mm,
So when you have ability scores that are the basic math of the game, you rely on that. So you make it very difficult to move them around frequently or drastically without making the game too challenging for an audience or get into that feel bad territory. Uh, so, right, if you
yeah.
keep having to adjust your to hits and damage, and even if it's just by one, it's just that one more thing to keep track of, which for some groups is no problem at all. And for some groups, you have enough trouble teaching them to add 3 to their attack roll or add 6 to their damage that now if you're going to say add 5, you've lost. You've
I think the
lost the threat.
perfect example of this was, I mean, you can go through the additions of like, say,
Yeah.
first and second, third, fourth, fifth to ability drain, and
Mhm.
particularly how it impacted. It's one thing with attacks and things like that, but
Mhm.
spellcasters, right? When
Yep.
you were in third edition and your intelligence was drained, and now you had to refigure out how many spell slots you had. Nobody was having fun doing that. I've
Or if
never
you could
seen
cast
anybody
spells at
go,
all.
"Oh, yippee! I need to decide which spells I've lost and how to
Yeah.
adjudicate this." No, thank you. Right? Just
Yep. So, but what you are describing here is where a game like Fate and its aspects can be wonderful. So, after that long trek through the forest, you gain the aspect of rough around the edges. You put that aspect there on that table on that index card, and you don't have to change your character. You just know that you're all rough around the edges now. And when it comes to interacting with the first person you meet when you enter the city, the game master can just say, well, you're rough around the edges, pulls out a fate point. So your first interaction with this person, it doesn't go well. Let's role play that. All right. They refuse or they call the guards because you've insulted them. And here's your fate point. Let's carry on. You could do the same thing with anything with those aspects in a game like Fate. Would that work in D&D? Possibly. You can do it with disadvantage.
mm,
That allows you to do it without changing ability scores, without changing modifiers. And you can still say it's been a month since you've eaten in public. You're sitting there and you're trying to make a I can use the action now. You're trying to make an influence action while you're sitting there eating, talking to the mayor. Well, she sees how you're eating with your hands, and is instantly repulsed by what you're
yeah.
doing. So make that persuasion check with disadvantage.
Yeah, two that I think of, and there's another one that's in the back of my head that I can't think of, where your ability scores do change up and down more, but for some reason I can't come up with it. I know when I first saw this question, I thought of that, but two others,
Mhm.
Cipher System.
Mhm.
You can your ability pool is also like an effort pool, so you can spend points to reduce that pool to achieve things. You can take damage to those pools, and that is how damage works. They're also your hit points, so you can reduce those. Now they do come up to that level, but the game expects it to be a lot more up and down. It's sort of what you're talking about. I went through the harrowing jungle. I got beat up by the person. Then your levels go up and down, and then your ability to kind of pull from that pool has also been used up. And that is a neat system to do that, and to enable that, as you're talking about, Shawn. The rest of the game doesn't rely on you being at whatever level X is. The
Mhm.
game is fluid enough with its DCs and how it works to handle that. Similarly, the game of Alien, and also Coriolis and a few of the other Freely games, have a system where how you achieve rolling for something is based on things like your ability score, sure, but your gear,
Mhm.
your situation, your whatever, these various things. And so having one of them stripped away doesn't cause an immediate failure. And
Mhm.
your ingenuity might work to help you get that result. Plus, you could just get lucky on the way the dice work, because it's not a
Mhm.
d20 and some hard big DC you
Mhm.
can only hit under certain conditions. So all that comes together in the game's definition to allow for this, where your gear can break and now you can't use it. And so make the
Mhm.
check without that. And also you're hindered and also wounded and all these things. And yet you still have a chance at success because the game's math allows for that variance.
Yep. Yeah. And in Alien, don't you add extra dice the more stressed you get?
Yes, yeah, in Alien
Uh,
especially, you have a greater chance to succeed with your stress, but if you roll more face huggers on your stress dice, now you might lose control of your character, shoot the closest person, run away screaming, any number of things, right, to represent things.
yeah.
Especially in that, I think it's called the cinematic mode. You have that
Mhm.
happen.
Yeah. So the answer is in D&D you can do it, but it's sort of antithetical to what the game expects, but there might be other ways that you can do it by adding a different set of points or a different die that means something compared to what is either inspiring you to be greater or pulling you down to make you a little less than you normally would be.
Yeah. Yep.
And we can get to one more question. Let's get to DMWA DJ via YouTube. On the topic of organized play and the rate of new content release, why not stagger a release schedule with two storylines? For example, storyline A, Path A, is Tiamat and the Chromatic Dragons, and storyline B, Adventure Path B, is a Temple of Elemental Evil plot.
Mm.
Both releasing once a month, but 2 weeks separated from one another so that casual groups can pick just one path to follow. The hardcore players can pick both, albeit with different characters. From a business perspective, I understand twice the writers. That's a money problem.
Mm.
But from a community perspective, that would solve the problem of putting out too much content or not enough content. Is it that the hardcore players would want to play one character in both, or that the more casual players feel like the grass is always greener in the other path? This is a great question,
Yeah.
DJWA or DMWA DJ. And as you're asking, I'm like, oh, but you know what? The character players are going to want to play the same character. Oh, and, oh, he just said that. Okay, well, the other
Mhm.
players are going to wonder what's going on in the other one. Oh, you just said that.
Yeah.
So it's I've seen organized play programs do exactly this.
Mhm.
And it does alleviate some of the problem, but there's always another audience out there who is off put by whatever you do.
Yeah. The typical way that this has been handled in the past is to say, here is our main campaign, and
Mhm.
then offshoot campaigns are introduced, right? So we get things like the Eberron or the Ravenloft. And often these are trying to create a slightly different experience. They're sort of deliberately being the alternative campaign. Ashes of Athos was that, right? Living Forgotten Realms allowed you to do everything you wanted with 4th edition, and you could be gnolls and whatever. And then Dark Sun provided this. You are in the Dark Sun world, only these options, deep Dark Sun storyline, and you're only playing a few adventures because if I give you too many, you wouldn't play them because you're busy playing Living Forgotten Realms, right? Or you're a more casual player who's only coming to the convention for this. So that was a really important part of how it was put together, and it's how often secondary campaigns have been. They kind of fit into and underneath the normal big campaign. If you do two big campaigns, usually they run into one another. And so the best example I can think of this is Living Greyhawk and Living City, where Living City was the original organized play campaign that you could get invested in. 3rd edition launched Living Greyhawk, and the two kind of struggled for attention until Living Greyhawk just really won out, and everybody started shifting over to it. I think the more that's a problem with how you can do that. Now, could you architect so it dovetails? And then I might look at something like D&D Encounters, which ran concurrent to Living Forgotten Realms, but served a different audience and had a totally separate cadence, right? So every week you're playing D&D Encounters. After X weeks, launch a new story, and everything is a single session, while Living Forgotten Realms had all of these adventures you could play. And you could even take your character across sometimes for some seasons,
Mhm.
but very few people did that I saw. Generally, people were in one boat or the other because it fits the style of play you want. There are other issues like admins and all that are wearing two hats now because they're two different programs. That makes it difficult as well.
Yeah. It is a solution that, as Teos said, people have used. It's just not the one solution fits all solution that we would love to see, but
Yeah.
it isn't. Um,
Yeah, if I were trying to kind of solve this problem specifically, what I might look at is saying, here's your main campaign, right? So think of like AL. Here's your auxiliary story path that takes place in a part of the world that you could play both if you want to, or focus on one or the other. But they're basically the same system, same engine, same rules, but it's a slightly different additional experience. That is easier to handle, because then your admins aren't really wearing two hats. It really is one hat, but there's an additional, piece. And so, like, I could think of this. It's almost like with third edition, Living Greyhawk had things like the core storyline and your regional storyline, or there were things like when there were lots of you could say Moonshays and Core AL, or Red Wizards, sort of like that. That you could manage that a little better to say, well, we've got our Red Wizards storyline and our Moonshay storyline. If you really want to play both, you can. But I don't think that it's orchestrated that way currently, right? Or has been over the years. It's been sort of just these. It's felt more like competition for your time.
Yeah. And the point, one of the points of organized play is to build a community. And to build a community, you need everyone playing the same stories. Yeah. So dividing them is fine, but then you get what Teos said, which is half the players playing this one, half the players playing the other. They can't communicate the way that you would like them to. Like if everyone was playing Baldur's Gate 3 and could tell the same story, it's about the same NPCs and that sort of thing. So it's just it's a tough nut to crack all around.
Something that could have worked is if you think back to like the 5 factions that were a big part of that initial 5th edition release and felt like the kind of glue behind the scenes that existed for organized play, for AL play. If you said everybody playing sort of core AL picks a faction and contributes points to the faction, and this has story effects on the world. We also have a store program. That store program runs more like D&D encounters, but at the end of each week or each season, we're also counting points up for how you influence the factions. That could be separate play, same community in certain ways, by bridging that, even though it's okay to play separately. And that could be interesting, right? If you said something like, you're running at Gen Con, you go, well, the AL events here have been impacted, and in fact, the tipping factor was the store program, right? But here's who's rising to the fore because of what everybody did. And that could maybe work.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those questions. We got through all but one, and we appreciate that. We'll tackle that one next week. So, for all of you out there listening, I hope you enjoyed this show. Thank you, everyone who has sent in questions, everyone who comments on our YouTube, anyone who sends us email, talking to us via our Patreon and on our Discord. Thank you so much. You can support us by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. We have 3 pledge levels. Master of Dungeon supporters, thank you. You make the bulk of what we get, and we do appreciate that. Master of Realm supporters, I'm looking at your names right now in our show notes and seeing a bunch of wonderful folks. And the Masters of the Multiverse, Teos, could you do the honors this week?
It would be my pleasure.
I will stall for time as you find the list.
Agile Monk of Fantasy Companion Workshops. Keith Amon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing and about to drop a new book on us. Lou Anders at Lazy Wolf Studios. Craig Bailey, David Bastianson, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges Avalos, Bro Babalon. I knew I would have trouble with that one. Dead Inertia DM, Evil John Carney, Evan at Nimbleco, Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at nerdonomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, William Harshman at Rune Forge Tabletop Gaming, Ben Heisler and Paige Laitman, Shawn Hurst, Hyperlexic, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, The Mighty Jerd, JR of The Twilight Perspective, Brian King, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Chad Lench, Paul Mata, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, Anna B. Meyer at Fantasy Cartography, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Mighty Zeus, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, Philip and Lindsay, Frog Prince at Tentacles Squelching Wetly, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Robert Pazley, Vladimir Prena from Croatia, Pugnus, Ozymandias Rex, Runner Rick, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simonse, Tim Smith, Spark from Dunor Games, Josh and Liwanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Talus the Stormlord, Jeremy Taloman from the D&D and TV podcast, Tres, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Wasiak, Chris Webster, Zach Types, and Z. Walt Winfrey. Thank you all.
Excellent job, Teos. Thank you to everyone out there. You can go to the Patreon again at patreon.com/masteringdnd. You can also go to Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to this podcast and just give us the little rating there. Just give us a little click. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can do the thumbs up, like, subscribe, and all of that. Teos, what have you been up to on social media and where can people find it?
Last week I did 2 videos on tactics, one for the Etten and one for the Blob of Annihilation, which is a quite interesting creature. I'm sure you and I could spend an hour talking about just that monster. So you can find that all through alphastream.org and my YouTube channel. Where have you been, Shawn?
I have just been on social media at Shawn Merwin, and you can also follow the podcast at Mastering D&D on all of those same social media platforms. And again, you can also go to the Mastering Dungeons YouTube channel at youtube.com/@masteringdungeons and do your thing there. So we have gotten through the news and we got through a lot of listener feedback. So, Teos, what should we do now?
Let's see. I think that I'm going to create my new organized play program that is all meant to be a support network for parents who have their kids in college.
Mm-hmm. Living empty nest. I like it. I like it. And I am going to go turn into a blob of annihilation.
Delicious.
And good for you.